to the session itself, just to remind you, this is probably old news to most people, but just in case you're new joining us, just to remind you that all the sessions are being recorded. So just turn off your camera and your mic if you don't, or your camera if you don't want to be seen. And when we, while the presenters are speaking, if you could turn off your microphone and your camera if you're not presenting. That way you can use the active speaker view up in the top right-hand corner, and that way you'll only see the person that is presenting. And then we will have a Q&A. My cat's probably going to walk past. I keep, hello. We will have a Q&A at the very end when all three presentations are finished. And during the Q&A, if you don't mind turning your video back on, it just makes us feel like we're humans rather than black boxes. And if you want to ask a question, feel free to either indicate in the chat, either raise your hand or let me know that you've got a question, or if you want to actually write the question, I can read it out. And finally, of course, as always, let's be nice and respectful to one another. So I will introduce our first speaker, Rashmi Attri. And Rashmi's paper is entitled Songs of Earth and Its Inhabitants, Reading Ruskin Bowers Fiction. So Rashmi, you want to go ahead whenever you're ready.
Should I start?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay. So let me start. I start with a quote: species interdependence is a well-known fact, except when it comes to humans. With the ever-dissolving boundaries between human and non-human worlds, new concept of becoming one with the other and new area of study known as multi-species stories is emerging. And Donna Haraway's work provides the starting point for this species turn. Multi-species storytelling basically means getting on together, learning to become with other, as in the case of bacteria. So this is a counter narrative to our lonely Petric tales. And these multi-species narratives are freed from the spell of anthropocentric worldview. Such narratives claim that we humans are not categorically isolated beings. And the quality, this is a new anthroposcenario, and the quality of relationship of the human species to the natural world. While the traditional landscape narratives emphasize on how nature is beneficial to humans, multi-species storytelling lays stress on the non-profit value of nature to man, and it reconnects humans with other species of the earth. The paper explores, as the title goes, that it explores the writings, the fictional writings of Ruskin Bond from this perspective, from the lens of multi-species storytelling. Ruskin Bond is an Anglo-Indian writer of British descent, settled right from the very beginning in a small town of Uttarakhand state of India. It is a hill station, very beautiful hill station called Mussoorie. And he has never stepped out of it. He's a very popular, he has written about 100 short stories, many novels. He's popularly known as a children's short story writers as well. But his connect with the nature is something which he, which he always mentions as one of his identities. His writings can be described as the song of multi-species. Like Bruno, the great Italian romantic writer, Bond believes in the oneness of all. The entire reality is one in substance, in cause, in origin, and in God. This echoes deep ecology, which advocates the interconnected web of all life forms. And this is also the main premise of Indian metaphysical thought and the Vedic concept of that term Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is which means the term means that the entire universe is one big family. So this worldview includes both the animate and inanimate objects in its folds. So the landscape with all its inhabitants is an important character in Ruskin Bond's writings. And it doesn't exist just as a background to his stories. Rather, it has it contributes to the plot. It acts rather as an important character, just as we notice in Hardy's writings. If you read Hardy's novel, The Landscape, that is the Wessex, plays a very important role. All his human characters share wonderful relationship with the other species of the landscape. He has portrayed a non-dualistic world where humans and non-humans enjoy a reciprocal relationship with one another. And his non-human characters are as important and interesting as human ones. And he knows the world of nature as an insider and shows affinity with nature in all its forms, animals, birds, insects. So like Wordsworth, his connect with nature is very deep to the level of spirituality, and at times it reaches the height of divinity also. He has very sensitively caught the language of non-humans, their signs, codes, and shapes. And in his short stories, he has given voice to non-humans and thus has brought them to the subject position. From the periphery, he has brought these animals, these birds, other species to the center. So it is not the humans that are at the center of his short stories. These other species are equally important. So his literary world is replete with the fragrance of flowers, chirping of birds, clattering of rain. If you read his writings, you just fall in love with, even while being in a crowded city, metropolitan city of Delhi, if you're reading Ruskin Bond, then you feel that you are, transported to an idyllic, beautiful world. What attracts him most is the nature in its purest form, that is, in its wild form, not the adorned one. In one of his interviews, he says, in the jungles and in the nature as it exists in the jungles, which enthralls, wild roses give me more pleasure than the sophisticated domestic variety. On a walk in the foothills of Himalayas, I have encountered a number of these shrubs and climbers. In fact, in his writings, nature has been personified. So has he personified animals, birds, and other pets. And they act as one of the major characters in his short stories. In fact, their actions and reactions towards one another and towards humans constitutes the plot of the story. That's why I always relate him with many of the novels of Thomas Hardy, especially The Return of the Native. Ruskin Bond he equates nature with divinity and spirituality. In one of his stories, Rain in the Mountains, the title of the story is The Rain in the Mountains, we find that this kind of the sense of nature being divine, when one of its characters says, Himalayas lie at the feet of God and still retain the simplicity and innocence which binds them to God. Another story, Cherry Tree, its protagonist called Rakesh, when he touches the smooth bark of the tree, he feels its divinity and cries, is it what it feels to be God? Unquote. In Ruskin Bond's writings, nature communicates with humans at various levels. As we see in another story, The Last Tonga Ride. Here a young boy describing the banyan tree at his grandfather's house says, I quote, the tree made the first move, the first overture of friendship. As I climbed it, seemed as though someone was helping me. Invisible hands, the hands of the spirit in the tree, unquote. So like Wordsworth, nature for Bond is a healing force. It is a guiding force. It is a guardian and a caretaker, all in one. In Rain in the Mountains, he asserts this and he says, quote, the trees stand which watch over my day-to-day life. They are the guardians of my conscience. I work and live under the generous but highly principled supervision of trees, unquote. So nature not only nurtures the emotions, but also contributes to the well-being by endowing us with mental peace. This is how in one of his stories entitled The Most Beautiful, a character, the protagonist called Suresh feels about trees. He finds pleasure and comfort in the company of nature. Seeing trees in the distance, Suresh began to run towards them, shouting and clapping his hands. The trees also beckoned him. This is a classic example of the synergy that humans share with the nature in his writings. He feels that nature also influences our personality in a positive manner. In one of his interviews, he affirms, if our genes have shaped our biological makeup, our environment has shaped the development of our nature. And, there are innumerable stories where he compares the lifespan of a human being with that of the trees, drawing similarity. In one of the stories, Kite Maker, one of its characters, Mahmood, he says there is great affinity between trees and man. We grow at much the same pace if we are not hurt, starved, or cut down, unquote. So expanding the comparison, he further says, quote, in our youth, we are resplendent creature, and in our declining years, we stoop a little. We stretch our limbs in the sun, then with a sigh, we shed our last leaves, unquote. So nature, for him, is a living entity, an organism, both affecting and being affected by humans. Nature for him acts like a philosopher, and he describes in a story describing the oak tree. He says the oak has a secret, hidden wisdom. He has learned the art of survival. His bond with animals and insects and the other species that inhabit that landscape that he has portrayed in his stories further strengthens his love and relationship with nature and contributes in understanding it at deeper level. Such stories as The Leopard, The Panther's Moon, Tiger Burning Bright, and The Tunnel showcase his affection and understanding of the animal world. In the story Tiger Burning Bright, the writer depicts how the tiger and the villagers live in perfect harmony. And little further, like a true environmentalist, commenting on the extinction of tigers, the writer admonishes humanity with the words, quote, man needs land as much as tiger needs a jungle. The story further says, tiger is the very soul of India, and when the last tiger is gone, so would the soul of the country. He seems to harp on the need to be more inclusive and develop love for animals and other inhabitants of this planet Earth. He humanizes these animals as we see in the following lines, quote, although the tiger has passed the prime of his life, he had lost none of his majesty, unquote. The story called The Leopard also decries the extinction of such animals as leopards of cat family, while showing writers' affection for them. And the story at the same time makes plea for being more considerate towards the animals. The story ends with the lines of D.H. Lawrence's poems, quote, there was room in the world for mountain, lion, and me, unquote. Then there's a story entitled Monkey. And in this story, writer says, never shoot a monkey. It's not only that they are sacred to Hindus, but they are rather humans. That's how he wants to communicate that there is no basic difference. In some of his stories, as Panther's Moon, A Tiger at Home, and A Crow for All Seasons, the writer has specifically focused on the behavior of these animals and birds towards humans. These stories have given central subject position to these animals and birds as in A Crow for All Seasons, which is very interesting story. The entire story has been written from the perspective of a crow, and all the dialogues belong to a crow called Speedy. I quote, "There is a crow named Speedy, which is much more conscious of the mutual coexistence of man and birds than the human beings." The writer has given dialogue to this crow, which says, quote, "I have just realized how much we depend on humans. The crow are among the very few who sincerely desire the preservation of human species," unquote. The story also mentions that crows are important in recycling their refuse. In the same manner, the protagonist of a story, The Tunnel, Kishan Singh, also realizes and stresses, pinpoints, highlights the mutual coexistence of man and animals and is not scared of leopard at all. He says, I quote, "The leopard knows me well. We have seen each other many times. I don't think it'll attack me," unquote. He further asserts that leopard never harm humans, provided we are sensitive to them and protect them. Then there is a story, All Creatures, Great and Small. That's the title of the story. Here the writer talks of the sync between man, animal, and birds. And the story mentions various types of pet animals that his grandfather's house were there, as monkey, python, tortoise, Indian hornbill, etc. And all those pets animal were living, in great harmony. They were giving a perfect example of how to live, how to be together without encroaching upon each other's territory. And even such ferocious animals as tigers can also be kept as pet animals. That's what the writer emphasizes in a story. The story called Tiger at Home. Both the tiger and man adapt to each other's needs and live in harmony without anyone preying on the other. Describing the tiger very beautifully, the narrator says, I quote, "With the crafty look in the glittering eyes and his body crouching, he would creep closer to me, suddenly making a dash for my feet, rolling over on his back and kicking with delight and pretending to bite my ankles," unquote. This is perfect example of fellow feeling. Like a true biologist, Bond observes the behavior and peculiar habits of these birds and animals. In all the stories described above, he emphatically points out that animals don't consider humans as their enemies, never harm them. They never harm mankind unless provoked. This has been uttered by many of his characters in different stories. The narrator of a story, Leopard, in the following lines, seems to say the same thing, that as I had not come to the forest to take anything, the birds and animals soon became accustomed of my presence there. His stories articulate the delicate balance between the world of man and nature and animals, and he asserts that nature's harmony includes all sorts of birds, animals, creeping creatures. This is interdependence and multi-species storytelling, or becoming, one with each other. I will end my paper with the beautiful lines from one of his poems called Rainbow. And in the lines go as I read the lines. "The leaf so complete in itself is only part of the tree. The tree so complete in itself is only part of the forest. And the forest runs down from the hills to the sea. And the sea so complete in itself rests like a raindrop in the hand of God," unquote. Thank you very much. I hope I'm on time. I did not take more time than 20 minutes.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much, Rashmi. That was really uplifting. I really enjoyed that. And I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion afterwards. Thank you so much. And no
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we move on then to our second speaker. So, have we got, hold on, bear with me. My everything's suddenly gone. I'm having a technical hitch. Here we go. Aditi is next. Aditi Daskan.
Aditi.
Hi.
Hi.
And so Aditi's paper is entitled Interspecies Relatedness and Ethics in Mahadevi Verma's Mariva Parivar and Nilanjana Ray's The Wildings. And sorry, just before you start, Aditi, if I could ask Rashmi, if you don't mind turning off your microphone, just so that we don't have the, although I've enjoyed the sounds of the city, but thank you. Okay, take it away, Aditi, when you're ready. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I would begin by thanking the organizers and the chair for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present my thoughts today in this webinar. And the compulsory question, am I perfectly audible and visible to all of you?
Yep, you're fine.
Yes, okay, all right. So just at any point I am not audible, do feel free to interrupt me and let me know, and I'll try and fix it up. So a lot of the context that my paper has today, as the title has already been declared by the chair, about interspecies relatedness and ethics in Mahadevi Verma's Mera Parivar and Nilanjana Ray's The Wildings, has been already discussed over yesterday and today, over the presentations that were made yesterday and today. And I was very impressed by the depth of those discussions, and carrying forward those discussions and debates, I would now like to directly plunge in onto the authors that I will be discussing today. And they are Mahadevi Verma, as I said, and Nilanjana Ray. So Mahadevi Verma, just a brief introduction, is a very popular writer, like Ruskin Bond, as Dr. Rashmi Atri has pointed out. And both of their works you would obviously find in elementary level textbooks. So if you have done your schooling in India, you will realize that a lot of these works of Mahadevi Verma and Ruskin Bond are instrumental in shaping that multi-species perspective, and often the first love that children come to have for animals and plants around them. So beginning with Mahadevi Verma, she has written a lot about varied subjects, being it from language, about women, etc. And she has also written a lot of memoirs. And Mera Parivar is a sort of a biography come memoir of her pets or companion animals that she was very, very fond of. And as the title goes, Mera Parivar in Hindi would mean my family in English. So this would obviously show the kinship that Verma felt with her extended family of non-human animals, so to say. And this is how she begins talking about her companion animals as a family. That is how she titles her book. And to begin with, I would now come to the question of biography, because Verma is detailing the lives of her pets, and starting from how she came to get them, and how they and how the association comes to an end, of course, through when the pet dies. So I would now talk a bit about the biographical writing and the problem of biography as such, and later come to the question of animal biographies in particular. So any biographical writing attempts to capture the individuality of the biographed, as is obvious. For animals particularly, it can be seen as breaking the mold of sameness within which we club all that flies, crawls, swim, trots, etc. Etymologically, it comes from the Greek word bio, meaning life, and graphein, meaning writing. So sorry for the interruption, but just in case I pronounce any of the names wrong, do excuse me. I just might not be aware of the pronunciation, and I'll, for the references part, the references that I make in my paper, I'll put them in the chat box once I finish my talk. Thank you. So etymologically, it comes from the Greek word bio, meaning life, and graphe, meaning writing. Often used by people to eulogize a person or an ideology, the genre presents its own problems. One can wonder what constitutes a life. In this case, what constitutes an animal life? Animal perspective is not entirely accessible to humans. For instance, we do not possess the sharp sense of smell of a dog. Virginia Woolf has had considered anyone who had lived a life and left traces of the same to be worthy of a biography. The traces that animals leave behind are different from humans. For example, fur on clothes, odor around the house or other spaces, food remains, scratches, etc. If biographies are primarily concerned with the individualities of animals, then what happens to the vast number of nameless animals who find no place in our memories? Writing a biography is definitely a selective process. In fact, this is the very discussion that we were having a few minutes ago about selecting the process of selecting and naming individual animals. While that means that we recognize that animals' individuality and subjectivity, that could also mean that we sort of push other animals to the background and sort of foregrounding and emphasizing on that one particular animal. So it then seems to mirror our extension of subjectivities and ethics to selected animals. More often than not, these consist of pets and not animals reared for food or labor. To reverse the process, one can then think of biographies becoming the precondition to accord an animal with subjectivity. So it is more likely that if I've read about a particular animal, it is only then I would see that animal and empathize with that animal and see that animal as having subjectivity and mind of its own. Another issue faced by the biography is that relationship between the biography and the biographed is precarious. The biographed is often a product of biographer's perspective. It is difficult to attain perfect correspondence between the lives lived and that textually accounted for. Does this then deprive the biographed of agency and junk the envisioned emancipation of the subject? Kreber and Roscher are of the opinion that animal biographies can be a result of mutual production instead of plain reproduction. So biographies do more than just reproduce animals, but through mediation process of storytelling, interpretation, and interaction, it actively produces animal personhood with more complex, dynamic forms of identity and interiority. And this was a quote from Kreber and Roscher. I'll put down the reference in the text in a while. Instead of a single biography, one may write about multiple lives, like Mahadevi Verma actually does. So I think that this is the point, if I'm not wrong, Olia, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Olia was trying to bring in some time back, that she was speaking about how our perspective is sort of always mediated by other species. So it is very difficult to look for a solitary animal's perspective. Of course, a perspective develops in association with other animals or humans and other companion species. So Mahadevi Verma too, in her course of describing that particular animal, like her in her memoir, you will have parts. The parts are titled with the names of that particular animal. So if she's writing about her dog or a deer, she will have the name as the title. But in that course of describing the life of that particular animal, she will also talk about other lives of animals and humans which were associated directly or indirectly with that particular animal. So when we write animal or human biographies, of course, it's about a network of lives than just one particular animal or human that we are talking about. So we have to keep that in mind. Perspective is always in association with other creatures whom we might just ignore. So the earliest writing about animal lives have been by biologists and ethologists who have studied animal behavior. Zoographies make animal more noticeable socially, and animals become the heroes of the narrative. So a lot of these ethologists, biologists, of course, trace that one moment, like I just said, Mahadevi Verma or Ruskin Bond is that could be that one moment for Indian elementary school going kids where they start to develop their love for animals. So Mahadevi Verma too describes that particular moment where her association with animals sort of started, and she accounts her point of beginning of affection for animals. It was Rosie, a terrier gifted by her father on her 5th birthday. Rosie would play with her, drink milk with her, and sleep with her. As she says, and I'm quoting, the beginning of my love for animals can be said to have begun with the companionship of Rosie, who remained inseparable for 13 years. And that is my translation from Hindi. So again, now I'm coming back to the question of naming. Naming is the first act of individuation in accordance of accepting of personhood, as I mentioned earlier. And Mahadevi Verma names her animals on the basis of their characters or their physical features. For example, she had this peacock whom she named as Neelkant. Neel in Hindi would mean as blue, and Kant would mean throat. So because the peacock has a blue throat, she names it Neelkant. And similarly, she names a deer called Sona. Sona would mean golden, and because the deer had golden fur on its body, on her body, she would call it Sona. So I'm sorry for the, I'm not very conscious of the personal pronouns that I'm using here. I know I'm mentioning the gender at times, and at times I'm saying it or that. So for some animals, their demeanor is the context from which their name comes about. So Durmukh is this rabbit, and Durmukh would mean somebody who is foul-mouthed, as in because Zurmukh was this very hostile rabbit, and it could be very aggressive towards its fellow creatures, and the other pets sort of lived in dread of Durmukh. So Durmukh is this rabbit that she has who has a very dangerous propensity to bite other creatures. So instead of thinking of animals as ahistorical beings, Verma gives us elaborate descriptions of how she came across her pets and their histories. So it is very important here, because often we overlook the histories of animals, and this is a serious question of how to write animal histories and animal historiography. Of course, the question of perception comes about again. But Nietzsche once pointed out that animals are ahistorical beings, and one can only envy their state of forgetfulness. We humans, of course, tend to remember way too much than we need to, but that is another problem here. And Verma sort of recounts those histories of animals that she lives with, and she talks about Nilu, the dog, whom she adopted as a tiny puppy because its mother was killed by a leopard. And Nilu inherits her mother's benevolence. She's extremely caring towards other animals. In fact, Nilu dies sort of caring for her fellow creatures, because all over throughout the night, Nilu would stand and guard around so that no harm would come to her fellow pets in those cold nights, and that sort of makes her sick, and she dies, passes away. And this is how she talks about other animals, the history of other animals as well. And Durmukh, as I pointed out, is this hostile rabbit, and Verma looks for that trauma that might have affected Durmukh's behavior, and she points out to the fact, Durmukh's mother was killed by a snake when Durmukh was very young, and Durmukh somehow survived by hiding beneath his mother's feet. And Durmukh is extremely aggressive, and Verma, although she has aggressive, and that's also one point of complexity of animals' relationship with other animals, because these aren't very easy romanticized idyllic relationships that these animals have with each other or with humans. So both these authors bring out that complexity of how to deal with aggressive animals. So despite the fact that Burma has a number of aggressive pets, she does not try to punish or tame them, so to say. And what she tries is to sort of separate them from other pets, so they do not end up harming other creatures who are also present in the household. And so author, as I mentioned, Durmukh's mother had been killed when Durmukh was very young, and so the author wonders whether that absent parental or motherly affection could have tempered Durmukh into a less aggressive creature. Another observation here is that Verma also makes references to classical texts, as Boria Sachs, who has written on animal traditions has observed every animal is a tradition. Verma also refers to classical texts portraying animal. Abhigyan Shakuntalam is a long classical poem by the Indian Sanskrit poet Kalidasa. And when Shakuntala prepares to leave her guru's hermitage, she is held back by a deer with whom she had formed a filial relationship. She had nursed the deer when thorns sort of pricked the deer's mouth, and Shakuntala had nursed it back. So in the course of narrating Sona's life, who is a deer and is of course one of the companion animals of Burma in Burma's household, she makes this mention of Abhigyan Shakuntalam. Also, Verma gives very intimate description of the last days of her pets. So after a pet dies, she immerses the body in the holy Ganges. So Ganga is a river in northern eastern India, and for Hindus who are as has been pointed out, in majority in India, Ganga has a huge spiritual significance as well. So often, I mean, when a person dies, after cremating the body, you dip the ashes in the river, you immerse the ashes in river Ganga. um, so Mahadevi Verma too, when a pet dies, she immerses that body in the river Ganga as a means of giving that dignity to the dead animal. So animals, and I have been looking at tweets, how animals, there is this huge culture of mourning pets on social media as well. Animals are described as going over the rainbow. Deaths are undoubtedly painful. I mean, be it animals or humans, they are a result, in the book, they are a result of human cruelty, animal aggression on sickness. Deaths sort of make us relook at the lives and the affectionate bonds that Mahadevi Verma shared with the animals. And one wonders about the violence of love itself. I mean, love demands a part of each other. One ceases to be a sovereign subject in love, and perhaps this is why only death can lead to eternal freedom. I'll now come to the next author, and this is Nilanjana Ray's The Wildings. Nilanjana Ray, again, she's somebody who has straddled the world of both journalism and fictional writing, and she has written this novel in English, but she's a Bengali, and so there are names which would make more sense in Bangla. So since I am too from this state of West Bengal and my first language is Bangla, I will translate those names to make sense for you. Nilanjana Ray's Wildings narrates the lives of cat community in Nizamuddin area of New Delhi. The notable cats include Hulo, Beral, Meow, Katar, and the kitten Southpaw, the Dargah cats, and the sender kitten Mara. So Beral and Meow are, Meow of course we know is the common cat sound, and Beral means cat in Bangla. And I'll now come to the fact about sender cat that I mentioned, sender cat Mara. So the sender cat is a cat with special powers. A sender comes into the cat community. There is a little bit of fantasy element here, perhaps, but nonetheless. So a sender comes to a cat community when times require a sender to arrive. So the cats must negotiate with other species like the kites, mongoose, dogs, squirrels, etc., and of course humans. Humans are called as big feet by the cats. The kitten Mara is a sender. A sender is born in a community after many years when the community needs one. Senders have special powers. A sender can hear and see things each other cats cannot. It can also travel vicariously, like without physically transporting itself from one place to another. A sender can be at several places at one particular time. So Mara, our kitten Mara is the sender, and Mara is adopted by a human household. So she is what has been called in the book as insider cat, and there is a very obvious tension that comes into play when Mara befriends the kitten Southpaw. And Southpaw is this kitten who has been orphaned, and he is brought up sort of by the community together because he has no mother. So the kitten Mara has been adopted by a human household, and there is a whole debate about insider and outsider cat. and that I'll come to in a while. So the first fight, there are a number of fights, and there are friendly fights. Not all fights mean aggression. So the first fight in the cat community. So the first fight that occurs between Hulo and Beral is Hulo is again a tom cat in Bangla. So Hulu and Beral fight to decide whether the sender kitten be allowed to live. So they are very suspicious of the sender kitten because this kitten has special powers. They do not know what to do with this kitten. And Beral eventually wins the fight, and she starts to tame Mara because Mara is the sender kitten and she has special powers, and all her warnings are way too loud for the cat community. So she tries to tame Mara and sort of tone down her powers. And this brings in an interesting idea, because we see that taming is not just limited to humans taming animals. Animals also are taming other animals. And this can be sort of anthropomorphic, but this is rather an interesting observation here. And now I come to the debate about insider and outsider cats. The basic distinction between insider and outsider cat causes much conflict between the kitten Southpaw and her friend Mara. Southpaw is so confounded by Mara's habits that he wonders if she is a cat at all. He thinks that she looked like one, smelled like one, but she did not think like one. Mara is repulsed at the thought of having to live outside and hunting for food. Southpaw finds her a spoiled brat. Mara wonders, oh, I mean, Mara can never imagine hunting and killing and the visible violence of the outside world. All that is very extremely cruel to Mara. And Southpaw finds that, that is a very coming from a very privileged position. At one point, Southpaw uh, asks Mara, to why doesn't she want to go for a hunt? And Mara tells him that, well, I can hear my prey speaking to me. How can I kill it? And that's scandalous to Mara. How can you kill a prey? And Southpaw, this is laughable for Southpaw, because he tells Mara, look, your cat food that your human is feeding you is obviously that has that prey killed by someone else. It's just not visible to you. So that would mean double standards. That would mean that you are simply being hypocritical and not accepting that you are ultimately eating a prey that has been killed by someone else, if not you. So the other group of animals is described at Delhi Zoo. And Delhi Zoo is somewhere Mara travels vicariously. As I said, Mara is this sender cat with special powers, so she can travel across at one point of time to several places. So she befriends these tigers, Ozymandias and his family, at the Delhi Zoo. So Rani is Ozymandias' mate, the tigress, and their cub Rudra, and the langur Tantra. So the zoo animals were captured as adults, like Ozymandias miss the forest terribly. So the zoo animals are very uncomfortable in the zoo, and they want to go back to the forest. But however, the animals who are brought to the zoo as young cubs, like Rudra and Tantra, are just better. Mara, who traveled vicariously, befriends them, and Rudra and Tantra become her playmates. Their friendship continues for some time until Tawny, another white tiger cub, is introduced to the tiger enclosure. Soon Rudra and Tawny become good friends. As the animals grow up, they seek companionship of their own kind. Once, while Tantra and Rudra avoid Mara, she feels dejected. Tantra and Rudra try to explain to her it is okay to be playmates as kids, but once animals grow up, they might hurt each other unintentionally because of their instincts. Tantra tries to befriend the orangutans and encourages Mara to find friends of her own kind. And this logic is incomprehensible to Mara, who loves their company. It is only after Rudra roars to explain her that she's scared and retreats to the lonely one's world. So Rudra tries to explain her, look, here I am a tiger, and even if I don't want, I might just harm you unintentionally, even while we are playing. And it's okay to be sort of affectionate and playing while we are kids, but as we are growing up, our physical features like our claws and our teeth are becoming sharper, and that might end in some accidents that both of us would not like to happen. So this makes Mara, I'm sorry, very, very lonely. And as Beral, and even though Beral is the Beral who was taming Mara, and she tries to show her around, and Beral is always very kind and nice to Mara, and she tells her, come, why don't you come outside, and why confine yourself to the inside world? And Mara refuses that. Mara is somebody who can never make sense of the outside world. And as Mara is watching her first monsoon, these are some beautiful lines. Mara thinks that she would never be at home in the vast wide world, while the skies yawned endlessly and whiskers of other cats bristled when they talked of the sender. So there is another group of cat known as the feral cats. So this is a clouder of cat who live in this shuttered house, and they've never once come out. So there is a huge battle that follows hereafter, and all of that story would perhaps make me overshoot the time limit. So there is another point which I want to make here, which is once that battle follows with the feral cats, we see very interesting alliances being made within the animal communities. And Meow, the oldest of the cats, approaches the kites for them to help them in the battle. And Meow traces the history of cat community, and she talks about times where, things weren't as peaceful and food wasn't as readily available, and they had to forage garbage dumps to look for food. And this sort of storytelling is very, very important here, because once again that reminds us that animals too have stories to tell, and animals can tell their own stories as well. So Tooth, who is a kite and who does not have, who is again orphaned, was orphaned very early in his childhood, and he asks Meow, will you tell me the story, Meow? And this is important because it shows how telling capabilities and memory of animals are as important as humans. It is essential function of bridging differences between species. Meow tells Tooth how her mother valiantly fought the crows who had attacked the neighborhood. To celebrate her victory, Stoop soared high in the sky and did various acts in the air like upward triple roll. And despite warnings from her wind commander to be careful of the electric wire, Stoop did not heed and continued recklessly. So I'll just conclude. I know I'm sort of overshooting my time. So Toke Thompson in his paper has studied the storytelling abilities of animals in his paper, and he uses the frame of play, as in a play that helps us. Play would mean that we live in some sort of a story time where we sort of enact a particular scene, and that means that we can live in 2 time zones. I'll elaborate that over the question answer session. So of course, this is a world which shows that relationships can be very fraught, very difficult, but nonetheless, in a world like ours, we must not, despite all problems that we encounter, must not ever stop forging those relationships. Thank you there. I'm sorry if I did overshoot the time limit.
No problem at all, Aditi. Thank you so much. That was wonderful, so insightful, really thought-provoking, and I wish we could have allowed you to carry on talking about the things that you've not had time to cover, but hopefully we can get to that in the Q&A session. So thank you so much for that. And so we will move on to our third presentation in this second session, which is our speakers are Ute Horner and Matthias Antlefinger, and the title of their presentation, I think you're both presenting, I think, is Visiting Octopus, Seeing Through Glass Clearly.
Okay, thank you. I will share my screen now. So I hope it works and that you can hear me and see it full screen. Thanks for this very intensive talk. I have to get my mind clear again, and I'm still in all the stories that Aditi was talking about. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak about our project, Visiting Octopus, which is an ongoing project. And we have been developing it in the context of Octolab. It's an interdisciplinary research team of artists, writers, and scientists. And to very briefly introduce ourselves, Matthias and I are teaching at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne in the field of transmedia spaces. We are an artist couple, but also part of an interspecies collective. And Matthias cannot join us today. Mrs. Kasper, who just flew away, stepped in, but I think she will come back and support me. And we have been living and working together with Parrots, there she is, for almost 20 years, which has shaped us as artists significantly. Dealing with animals as individuals, with their agency, their needs and abilities, has become a central element of our work. On this image, you see Matthias and Clara sitting on his shoulder. Parrots and octopuses have many things in common when it comes to their relationship with humans. Both are subjects of extensive research concerning their amazing cognitive abilities. This is the famous gray parrot Alex working with Dr. Irene Pepperberg. Octopuses as well as parrots play, and even play with humans, which seems to fill the people who experience this with great joy. And this is the octopus teacher playing with her students. I assume many of you have seen the film. And parrots and octopuses have beaks. This is something we must be very attentive to as humans. What distinguishes octopuses and parrots is, among other things, that parrots are usually perceived as beautiful, whereas octopuses are often constructed as monstrous and repulsive, at least in Western culture. In his 19th century novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne uses disgust to construct the unsurmountable otherness of the kraken. Probably the most of us remember the moment when the crew of the Nautilus first sees the kraken through the glass. "What an awful animal," Ned Land exclaimed, the monster's mouth a beak made of horn and shaped like that of a parrot, opened and closed vertically. What a freak of nature, a bird's beak on a mollusk. As Donna Haraway emphasizes, stories have a powerful impact, and that is why it's so important what stories we tell and what ideas they are made of. In our piece, Visiting Octopus, we look through the glass of an aquarium. In the form of a multi-species ethnography, we tell the story of individual octopuses that live in environments designed and controlled by humans. So far, we have visited 4 locations: the Aquazoo in Düsseldorf and Sea Life Königswinter in Germany, Oceanopolis Brest in France, and Sea Life Melbourne in Australia. In the following, I will present an excerpt of the work and give you an idea about our approach and its underlying questions and assumptions. So, why look at animals? John Berger, the writer, artist, and art critic, asked in his famous essay from 1977, in which he analyzed the estrangement of humans and animals in the culture of capitalism. His criticism of the zoo as a place in which non-human animals are reduced to exhibition objects is still read and shared today. Interestingly, aquariums were, for a long time, and in a way they still are, exempt from this criticism. Even the early aquarists criticized zoos as prisons, but were at the same time convinced that the aquarium was something completely different, namely a part of the sea. In her book, The Aquarium, the historian Mareike Fennen points out, glass and its illusionistic characteristics play a central role in the power of this narrative. By presenting a sectional cut through the water, instead of a view from above, the glassy medium creates an eye-to-eye perspective, where, as the historian of science Stephen Jay Gould puts it, a human observer sees marine life from within, that is, as if he were underwater with the creatures depicted and therefore watching them at their own level. Aquariums were designed for the very beginning as immersive environments. As a central actor, the glass appears virtually invisible. Physically, glass is in an imperceptible state of flowing. Even its components, 60 proportions of sand, 180 proportions of ashes from marine plants, and 5 proportions of lime as a recipe from the production of glass from 640 BC proposes, seem to inherit this quality. In these glassy environments, other narrative signs like plants, grottos, vases, rocks, and so on are also at work. In the aforementioned essay, Berger writes, "For the spectators, they, the signs, are like theater props. For the animal, They constitute the bare minimum of an environment in which they can physically exist. In a zoo or an aquarium, respectively, he continues, non-human animals are always the observed ones. The fact that they can observe us has lost all significance. They are the objects of our ever-extending knowledge. What we know about them is an index of our power, and thus an index of what separates us from them. The more we know, the further away we are, the further away they are. So in our work, Visiting Octopus, we try to redirect the attention to the animal subjects, their history, their agency, their power to act. Formally, the work refers to the aesthetics of the aquarium. The viewers find themselves in a darkened room with illuminated displays and text panels. They move between the picture frames as if they were walking from tank to tank. While classic aquarium displays provide information about the geographical origin of animals, the characteristics of the species, and finally, the animals themselves, the displays in our work represent our approach to the animal subjects. Each location we visited is narrated through 4 displays. First, a Google Earth view of the location. Second, an image of the aquarium building. Third, a text display. And fourth, an image of the tank in which the octopus lives. The Google Earth view approaches the aquarium from a height of about 100 meters. Aquariums are built, as you can quickly see, near large rivers or directly at the sea. For some places, especially the research-related ones, this may have logistical reasons. For others, the proximity to the water is probably intended to create an emotional connection and suggest something like being in touch with nature. The second group of displays shows the aquarium buildings, the entrance situation. We see the architecture that prepares us for the encounter with the sea creatures and get an impression of how the architects and the institutions respectively envision our relationship with them. The Oceanopolis in Brest has the shape of a shell. We literally enter a marine animal to explore the life inside. The Löbbeke Museum Aquazoo is a combined research center and public aquarium and most reminiscent of a classical museum architecture. Sea life in Königswinter in turn reminds us of a huge paddling pool, whereas the one in Melbourne reminds us of a cinema or amusement park with its theater-like facade. The fourth and largest group of displays finally shows a photo of the tank in which the octopus lives. Here you see a detail of the tank at the Sea Life Melbourne, the octopus hiding in the imitation of a diver's helmet. The basin in Düsseldorf Aquazoo, marked with the label D7, is embedded in a kind of wall cabinet. At Sea Life Königswinter, the decoration follows the motif of the sunken city, with amphorae and a weathered plank filling the basin. At the Oceanopolis, the tank is embedded in a mural representing the marine food chain. Where in aquatic exhibitions, a display would inform that the octopus lives in the Mediterranean Sea, it is loyal to its location, it has 3 hearts, etc. In our exhibition, a quite different text appears, one that documents our empathic immersion into the octopus, who speaks about their wishes and needs, and also about how they perceive the human visitors in the aquarium. And I would like to read with you the story of our encounter in Brest. So in the exhibition, visitors would read the text silently with their inner reading voice, but for the moment I would read it quietly and you can follow me or turn the volume down as you like. So, Oceanopolis, Brest, France, September 24, 2019. I sat and imagined this small graceful octopus intensively before actually encountering the animal. I gradually felt a kind of throbbing around my head, as if it were very soft. Then it became clear to me it was the heart its heart, but also the human heart and the energy that emanates from it. The entire head of the octopus was filled with this pumping, with this heart. The siphon was like a main artery from the heart. It felt energetic and cool. It wasn't at all about its powerful arms, but instead everything seemed very light and garland-like, like a lace doily. A small, graceful octopus floating. The feeling was, go with the flow, going with something rather than going against it, to give into the currents. And suddenly I felt that the connection is the thing. The tentacles are like a hand that are attached to this heart, very directly, not with 5 fingers, but 8. And these 8 fingers are much more sensitive than those of a human hand. I can sense everything with them. If I sit on this scallop, then I know precisely how big it is, how it feels with all of its grooves. Very similar to with my human hand, but much quicker, as the heart, which is at the same time also the head, perceives everything much more directly. My food, for example, that was rather playful. There were shrimps that swam around me. I could have taken them, but I didn't take them. I wasn't hungry. I felt fearless, well aware of being trapped in terrain that I wished would be bigger, but also safe. Looking out into the exterior space, making contact with humans, terrified me at first, because they are enormous. From the way they approached the tank, it was clear to me that they are beings that try to comprehend everything with their 2 eyes. They come up to the tank, hold out their hands and contort themselves in some way or another. Eventually, I realized that they cannot harm me. Nevertheless, it's always frightening to see them from up close. The text is a transcript of our experience during a so-called animal meditation, a simple but intriguing mental technique that we learned from a contemporary animal communicator and that has its roots in ancient shamanist practices. It's a kind of guided imagination in which we politely ask the octopus to allow us to slip into his body. For a short time, we are shapeshifters and experience the world from his point of view. A 5th and final level of our work can be accessed via headphones. Aquariums are soundscapes that incorporate an acoustic design element. Melodies and spherical sounds enhance the immersion and give visitors the feeling of taking part in a kind of cinematic experience. Over our headphones, you hear a field recording that was taken from the respective aquarium, followed by our own field notes, in which we recorded our impressions, perceptions, and associations, our stream of consciousness as visitors. And I would like to play you an excerpt of this. It's about 2 minutes 30.
Et il y en a comme le robot ou comme la patane. Reculez-vous là, vous allez commencer. Ou la patane qui est là, sur la coquille plus loin.
Third Octopus Visit, Oceanopolis, Brest, September 2019. The signposting system at the entrance to Oceanopolis suggests huge crowds are expected. But as today is just a run-of-the-mill weekday, attendance is in fact rather modest. I ask the man at the cash desk about the octopus and he says, yes, there's a pulpo in the Pavillon Bretagne, right where the tour begins. The use of media inside the building is overwhelming and hugely outweighs the life experience. There are screens and projections everywhere. There are glimpses into labs set behind glass along the educational trail, in which huge acrylic glass cylinders with jellyfish in various stages of growth can be seen. Or the abyss box, a stainless steel chamber like a washing machine drum, which houses tiny deep-sea creatures at a pressure of 200 bars. It all has the look of an elaborate media art installation. On the search for the octopus, we happen upon a small tank that is embedded into the wall alongside others like a jewelry box. The wall itself is painting in a muted grey-blue tone and is adorned with graphics that depict the maritime food chain. The octopus is located in an aquarium roughly 45 by 70 centimeters in landscape format. At first, there is nothing to be seen of him, just two brownish, translucent shrimps that swim nervously back and forth. In the space next door, a diver in a neoprene wetsuit cleans the paints of a large aquarium from the inside and confuses me at first by making strange signs, but they are intended for another member of staff outside the tank. Now the small octopus moves solemnly along the edges of the pane of glass until he disappears behind the upper rim.
The octopuses we visited were very different. While the small octopus at Pavillon Bretagne seemed to arrange herself with the situation, the octopus at Aquazoo was rather angry at the visitors, and the octopus in Königswinter was mentally not present at all, dreaming herself back to her time in the sea. Of course, these attributions are anthropomorphic, and we may ask ourselves whether it is really possible for an octopus to control her growth, as the one at the Aquazoo told us, whether she can have a memory of her childhood or daydream. But anthropomorphic attributions are something we cannot completely avoid. And sometimes it seems necessary to bring a strategic anthropomorphism into play in order to make things more sharp, indicating that anthropodenial, a concept coined by the primatologist and ethologist Frans de Waal, is the problem we need to be more aware of. Creating empathy for animal subjects, radically adopting their point of view, may help us to understand more clearly what we see through the glass. As the philosopher Susanne Carr puts it, the realization of the other, be it human or non-human, as having reflective and resonant qualities, makes it available for communication. An object turns out to be a subject, and the anthropocentric frontier dissolves. So, thanks for listening. And now I'm very much looking forward to questions and remarks and to the whole discussion with you.
Thank you so much. Okay, that was beautiful visually.
Okay.
Fascinating audience. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Really fascinating and like moving speeches, I was about to say, presentations there. So thank you so much to all three speakers. And I now open us up. If I can ask people, if you don't mind turning your video on, please do, just so that we feel like we're in a, we're all actually here rather than black boxes, but no worries if you don't want to show your face. So then I'll look to the, I don't think we've had any questions yet via the chat box. Do we have any hands raised or anyone? Oh, here we go. A question from Megan. Oh, right. Could you share the reference to the philosopher at the end? Brilliant. So any questions for anyone? I have some, but I don't want to. Oh, yes. Brilliant. Megan. Fantastic.
Hiya, thank you. I was really struck by, thank you so much for all the presentations. They were all really wonderful and I thought worked really well together. But I was really struck by, in each of these, something that I think has been really thematic throughout the whole conference, and I guess it makes sense with the theme of multi-species heritage and storytelling being kind of the genesis for these papers, but that was that art is such a fundamental mode of us gaining a sense of kind of maybe intimacy in some cases, but also a sense of antagonism or agonism, as we were talking about yesterday, and in general kind of attending to more than human entanglements. So a lot of these papers that we've seen, and including some of the ones here, have, you know, looked at methodologies that have been, you know, ethnography or zoology or kind of more scientific approaches. But I think in all cases, and I think what really came together nicely in this panel was the way in which that's kind of just not enough. without art. And yeah, I guess I wanted to invite all of the speakers to maybe reflect a little bit more on that in respect to their particular papers.
Would it be okay if I begin?
Yeah, by all means.
Right. So I mean, yeah, that's a wonderful point, because I mean, just few minutes before my presentation, we were all talking about how we yet do not know how to excavate the non-human perspective entirely accurately as such. So that is where imagination comes to play. At least from the perspective that I look at, because I look at animals in literature, and imagination sort of bridges that gap for now, because no matter how much we try, it is very likely that we would not be entirely able to get access to a dog's sense of smell. And so instead of having any sort of unrealistic expectation of, you know, replacing that dog with our own perspective, imagination has a very crucial role to play here, and in not in just terms of having accurate accurate or not so accurate excavation of perspectives, but also in the larger case of what is happening in the world around is a crisis of imagination as well. And this is the very point that Amitav Ghosh too makes in his The Great Derangement. You know, we don't have literature which talks about climate change. We need more literature to talk about our companion species as well. And through imagination of imagining those worlds, can we bridge those gaps that have led to such a huge crisis in our times. Thank you.
Rashmi or Ute?
Yeah, maybe just a small remark. I think that these projects that problematize the relationship between humans and animals and also use the imaginative space, it's very important in the art, because in the art world, you're really not talking to the converted. Many people have no idea, don't think a lot about animal rights and our position to animals. So it's a very delicate space to act in. But it's also difficult because some kind of moral, asking for morality or ethics in arts is also a problematic thing, no? Because people kind of negotiate that. So artists who decide to play this in the art field are not so many, and it's important that they do, because it's a very delicate place to talk about these things. And I just encourage everyone to do it. And maybe the other thing I want to say is it's a lot about time. Many art pieces have to be pushed out very quickly. When we talk with our students, we always tell them, take your time, go slowly. And working with multi-species things, going slowly is just the thing you have to do. Everyone knows working with animals or plants, it takes a lot of time, and it really brings you down to do things more deep, more intense. And I really like that.
Thank you, Ute. And Rashmi, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, yes. Even I believe, I absolutely agree that one has to be very sensitive, and it takes time. And it's the writer that I have mentioned, Ruskin Bond. You know, most of his stories, whatever he has written, the commentary that he has portrayed in his writings is actually, you know, it's not absolutely imaginary. He this is most of his the short stories and experiences are autobiographical, and he describes grandfather's house, which was he says that which was nothing less than a zoo with so many different kinds of animals and pet animals and insects. So he have that kind of you know, love, camaraderie, fellow feeling without any fear, while actually living amongst them. So it is true that it's not something you develop by reading. It is something that you have to feel, you have to be with, and you have to be sensitive and responsible What I feel is that if you go back to the ancient, the classical texts of India, there also we find a lot of reference to humans and animals and birds leading a life in harmony. I mean, with no separation at all. I mean, if you quote Ramayana, Mahabharata, there's no separation. We don't feel that kind of a distinction. You don't find nature as inferior to humans. It's treated at equal level, and both need each other to sustain. For the sustenance of nature, it's mutual importance, significance, and need. That is realized. And when I teach, if I teach animation.
Oh dear. Oh, I think we've lost Rashmi. Oh no. Oh dear. Oh, well, while we're, hopefully she'll be able to log back in. And then we can go back to her for her to finish that answer. In the meantime, if we get is this here we go, Rashmi. We lost you there, but you're back, or at least I can see your icon. We can't hear you yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Yeah, we lost
you,
but yeah.
Even I could feel that. So, it's a part of, it's not just a text, it's part of a culture so when I teach my students, when I read any text from this angle, I start feeling and with great responsibility also. And I absolutely believe that if you have pet animals with you and they behave like humans, and but it takes time. So very difficult area how to sensitize others for this kind of a fellow feeling. It's not an easy task, but maybe with these kinds of writings we can do so.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that response. And I do have a question for Ute from David.
Hi there. Yeah. Thanks to all the speakers for another fantastic panel. This has been a really enjoyable conference so far. But my question is for Ute, and thanks for that particularly interesting paper at the end there. As I guess a kind of Seth head, I'm interested in your installation. I'm going to talk later a little bit about cephalopods and philosophy and so on. I'm really interested in the media archaeology of the strange links between cephalopods and digital media. And looking at your installation and your installation pieces, I wonder if you've thought through, and you could talk a little bit about your reasoning behind the four different image forms that you've put, the mixed media, and if you've thought about any of the relationships between software, digital media, and these soft animals.
Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, we try to relate to the exhibition design that we find in aquatic exhibitions. So you're in the dark and you see illuminated cases, and we thought, well, why not just change it, make it a light box? And maybe an idea behind is, what could a zoo of the future look like if you look back on that? And I hope this will not exist in maybe short time, and then how would we represent it again? So we changed the contents, and we kind of kept on with the aesthetics, no? And also with the text, we just changed the text to make the octopus speak and not us speak about someone else. And to have a sound file together with a photography, or maybe this refers to a person like Chris Marker and this photographic storytellings, huh? And there's lots of references for us, not necessary to tell them all, but maybe you get it as an audience, huh? But your question, I think, was rather to the digital field, and yeah, to be honest, we did not touch it, even that we have other projects in which we are much more into the digitality. This is looks kind of old-fashioned, but I thought we needed it to make this connection to this museum-style presentation of the aquarium, which also is something of the past. And but I'm curious what ideas you have about cephalopods and digital spaces.
Yeah, I feel a follow-up email or conversation coming on in later talk, to be honest. But I see there's more questions for you as well. So maybe we could pick up a conversation after the conference.
Would love to.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have a question for all three speakers from Zoe. Zoe, do you want to ask it yourself?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested, a bit like David, it's a bit of a self-interested question in that I work in fantasy genres. And I'm aware that the distinction between, you know, fantasy and realistic genres is very Western, and I'm very unfamiliar with, you know, the Indian and Asian, more specifically, or more broadly, I mean, you know, literary traditions. So I wonder if any of the three speakers see any relevance to the distinction between fantasy and realism, and between fiction and non-fiction, as a way to reflect on the animal experience. And if this is not something that you find relevant at all, that is also a very valid answer.
May I begin? Yeah, right. So I mean, it is very difficult to draw sharp distinctions between Indian and Western. I mean, of course, in terms of classical text, again, Manusmriti is one text which I have read. I mean, parts of it. I've been reading this paper, but I mean, they too have. I mean, let's not essentialize. You know, we Hinduism or any other religion has a very as having a very non-violent approach to animals, because there could be ambivalent spaces, and when we are talking about cultures or religions, let's be more accepting of those ambivalent spaces as well. So there is no universal ethical paradigm, not just in terms of all religions, but also within religions. For instance, let's talk about food preferences within Hinduism. Within various regions of India can be very different. So you will find sections within Hinduism who are okay with eating beef, and of course, I mean, most Hindus would not be okay with that. So yes, I mean, where we talk about social, religious, or cultural preferences, there can be differences, and it is very difficult to draw make a sharp line between how does that go with Indian and Western, or within particular religions and cultures. I think in terms of your question of fantasy and non-fantasy, or fiction or non-fiction, it is again very difficult, because as I said, you know, when imagination comes into play, even when we are dealing with real animals, because we of course do not have access to the whole perception of that animal. So yes, I mean, that might overlap, those areas might overlap, because even in fiction, I mean, where we have a little more space for imagination as opposed to real animals, but in real life, of course, we should try to be less less irresponsibly, as said in the last panel, irresponsibly and anthropomorphic. But then again, this question of anthropomorphism is another problem that Franz P. Wall has dealt with in his paper, Are We in Anthropodenial? As much as anthropomorphism is a problem, anthropodenial is another problem. And so so of course, I mean, that connection with human beings, to think that animals are similar to us, might begin that sort of an affection that we have for animals in our childhood. And as we mature, I think that aim should be to give space to radical otherness as well. Not only we must empathize with people or beings which are like us, but also which are totally unlike us as well. So that is where finding the right balance between anthropodenial and anthropomorphism becomes very problematic. So I'm not sure if that wholly answers your question, but these are some thoughts that I had with as concerning fiction and non-fiction and cultural study of animals.
That was really useful and interesting and a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do either of the other speakers have a response?
Yes, maybe I just can pick up this Frans de Waal thing. For myself, I always thought fables are something I'm not so interested in anymore because it's so much about projection on animals. And then I read the text of Frans de Waal about anthropomorphism and anthropodenial, and he starts with, well, fables are important for children, because in this context, they learn that this animal likeness of humans and the human likeness of animals, it's something we can value, and it's a starting point. And so I kind of slightly turned my idea about it. But to get maybe a bit directly to our project, I think we use this technique, animal meditation. Some people may say this is just very obscure and it's esoteric or whatever. But as far as I learned in other countries, this is not obscure. It's an everyday practice, and it's used just to get information about animals because you can talk with them. So is this fantasy or is this reality? And for us, we're not so, it's not so important in our investigation, is this true or not true? It's rather what changes if you allow these things to happen and allow animals to speak to you, even if it's just construction. But afterwards, you have a different connection and you think different about the others around you. And I think this is something very valuable, and fantasy and storytelling can promote to this, to change us. And that's why I think it's very important.
See, in India also we have, a collection like Panchatantra stories, and
yes.
Stories entitled Vikram and Betal, where this kind of friendship between animals and humans is shown. They are very interesting, and children in India are introduced to these stories quite early, and parents somehow introduce their child to these stories, maybe to inculcate in them this kind of a fallow feeling that animal world is not absolutely different. That is very interesting collection of stories, Vikram and Betal and Panchatantra.
Thank you so much, especially for all of these authors who I'm ashamed that I hadn't heard of, and I'm so excited to engage because all three presentations